I was standing in the front pew in a black dress that had been hanging in my closet for 4 years. The minister was halfway through the eulogy. I looked down the line at my little sister, and on her left hand, on the ring finger, was my grandmother's sapphire. The ring my grandmother promised me in 1995. The ring that had been in a safe deposit box on Main Street, Hartford, for 2 years. I stopped hearing the eulogy after that.
This is the story of an intensive care nurse from Hartford, Connecticut, who postponed her wedding 4 times in 5 years to keep her dying father alive. A younger sister who flew in from Boston for 3 days and went home with an heirloom that had been promised to another woman for 30 years. And a third-generation jeweler on Pratt Street, who still kept his father's handwritten ledger from 1995 in the back of a walnut drawer. It is a story about what a promise weighs when it is carried on a chain, and what happens when a piece of paper tries to outweigh it. This is After the Will. The Hargrove family had lived on the same tree-lined street in West Hartford, Connecticut, since 1972. Arthur Hargrove was a civil engineer who spent 39 years designing bridges for the State Department of Transportation. His wife, Joanne, taught second grade at the elementary school, 2 blocks from their house. They had 2 daughters. Emma was born in 1986. Lily was born in 1991. Their grandmother, Rose Hargrove, lived in a narrow brick row house in the Parkville neighborhood, 3 miles south, and she was the sun around which the family orbited for as long as she was alive.
I was 9 years old when Grandma Rose went into Hartford Hospital for what the doctors called a bad fall, but what turned out to be congestive heart failure. My mother brought me in on a Saturday morning. Grandma was in a room on the 4th floor with a window that looked down at a parking garage. She took my left hand in both of hers. She looked at the sapphire on her own ring finger. She slid it off and held it up to the light from the window. And she told me, in her quiet voice, "This is yours when the time comes. I want you to remember the day I said it." I remembered every second of it.
The ward nurse that morning was a woman named Patricia Doyle, who had been at Hartford Hospital for 21 years. She witnessed the moment. She walked to the nurse's station, took a yellow discharge form off the top of a stack, turned it over, and wrote a single sentence on the blank side. Rose Hargrove, room 413, stated her sapphire ring is for her granddaughter Emma when the time comes. She signed it and dated it. October 7th, 1995. The slip of paper lived in Rose's hospital chart for 11 days and then disappeared into the archive of a hospital that still kept paper records in those years.
Grandma Rose lived another 14 years. She moved in with us when I was 12. She watched me through middle school, through high school, through the first semester of nursing school at the University of Connecticut. She died in her sleep in our guest room on a Sunday morning in 2009. I was the one who found her. I was 23 years old. I had a stethoscope around my neck because I had been studying. I checked her pulse the way the textbook said. There was nothing. And for reasons I still cannot explain, I decided that morning I wanted to be an intensive care nurse.
Emma Hargrove graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the University of Connecticut in 2012. Her mother, Joanne, died of breast cancer in the same year, 6 weeks before the graduation ceremony. Emma wore her mother's silver cross around her neck at the pinning and has worn it every shift since. She was hired into the medical intensive care unit at Hartford Hospital in the summer of 2013. Arthur Hargrove, newly widowed, retired from the State Department of Transportation. The same week, his elder daughter started night shifts on the 4th floor of the hospital, where his own mother had once made a promise on a discharge form.
I met Tyler Lane in the spring of 2018 at a coffee shop on Farmington Avenue that no longer exists. He was an architect, working on the new pediatric wing of my hospital. He asked me what it was like to hold someone's hand while they died. Not as a line, as a real question. That was the reason I said yes to a second date. In December of 2019, on my birthday, in our kitchen in West Hartford, he got down on one knee. I told him I had a ring. I walked upstairs and took Grandma Rose's sapphire out of the jewelry box where it had been sleeping for 10 years. Tyler put it on my left hand himself.
The wedding was scheduled for May 16, 2020, at a small Episcopal church in Farmington. Emma mailed the save the date cards on a Thursday afternoon in January. On the following Monday, Arthur Hargrove woke up with a headache that did not answer to aspirin. On the Wednesday, he could not find the word for fork at the breakfast table. On the Friday, a neurosurgeon in the same hospital where Emma worked told them that the MRI showed a mass the size of a grape in the left frontal lobe. By the following Tuesday, Arthur was in a surgical suite one floor above the medical intensive care unit. Emma was the family member holding his hand when the anesthesia took him.
Tyler and I sat at our kitchen table on a Saturday night in March 2020, and I told him I wanted to postpone the wedding. He said yes before I finished the sentence. He said we could do it next spring. He said it the way a person says something they have already decided. I ripped up a stack of save the dates that night into a recycling bin. I did not cry. I did the math instead. Surgery plus 6 weeks of radiation plus 6 months of chemotherapy. I wrote the timeline on the back of an envelope. I told Tyler we could do October. Tyler said October. I believed both of us.
People will listen to this and assume I did not love my father. I want that corrected before we go any further. I loved him. I loved him in a way that does not fit into a television story. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in the south end of Boston in those years. I was 29 years old and I was working 60 hours a week at a pharmaceutical marketing firm, and I was the youngest person in the conference room at every meeting I walked into. I flew home for Christmas. I flew home for his birthday. I sent flowers the day of every surgery. I was not absent. I was far away. Those are different things.
The first postponement led to a second postponement. Arthur recovered from the March craniotomy well enough to walk the length of the hallway outside his hospital room by the middle of April. The radiation in June was harder than the surgery. By August, the follow-up scan showed a new shadow on the same side of the brain that the surgeons had already opened once. In October, the week the wedding had been rescheduled for, Arthur went back into the same operating room for the same procedure. Tyler sat in the same plastic chair in the same waiting room on the same floor. Emma wore her scrubs because she had come straight from a 12-hour shift. My grandfather opened Roth & Sons Jewelers on Pratt Street in downtown Hartford in 1952. My father ran the shop from 1978 to 2008. I took over the year my father retired. We have kept every ledger every owner has ever written in. I have a walnut drawer in the back room full of them. The entry for the Hargrove sapphire is in my father's handwriting, on the 1995 page in blue ballpoint ink. It reads, Hargrove sapphire, 0.87 carat, center stone, size 7 to 6.5, for Mrs. Rose, promised to granddaughter Emma, age 9. My father underlined the word promised twice. I have looked at that line 1,000 times in my life. I never expected to look at it with a woman crying in my shop. In the spring of 2022, Arthur Hargrove entered his third craniotomy in 26 months and emerged from it with a permanent weakness on the right side of his body and a new need for a wheelchair to cover any distance longer than the width of a hallway. Emma made the decision on a Friday afternoon in June. She sublet her apartment in Hartford. She packed her scrubs into 3 duffel bags and drove 7 miles back to the house on the tree-lined street in West Hartford where she had grown up. She moved into the room that had been her childhood bedroom. She was 36 years old. The third postponement was signed into existence that same weekend.
Tyler came home with me for the first 9 months. He worked from the dining room table. He cooked on the weekends. He drove Dad to the radiation appointments when I had a night shift. In February of 2023, on a Tuesday evening, after I had come off a 14-hour shift and I had dropped Dad at hospice day respite, and I had not showered in 2 days, Tyler sat down in the kitchen and he told me he did not know how to marry someone who was already married to a dying man. He was not cruel. He was tired. He left the ring on the counter. I took it upstairs. I put it back in the jewelry box where my grandmother had kept it. I closed the box. I went back to work the next morning.
6 weeks after Tyler Lane moved out, Emma walked the sapphire ring into the First Federal Bank on Main Street in West Hartford and rented a safe deposit box in her own name. She put the ring inside. She locked it. She handed the key to herself. She did not tell her sister. She did not tell her father. She did not tell anyone at the hospital where she worked. The ring lived in that metal drawer for the next 2 years.
I was Dad's primary caregiver, and I was also an intensive care nurse. And those two things are not the same thing, but they fit inside each other, like nesting dolls. I knew what the dexamethasone was doing to his cognition. I knew what the tumor was doing to his frontal lobes. I read his hospice progress notes the way another daughter reads her father's birthday card. In March of 2025, the nurse practitioner wrote the phrase severe cognitive impairment for the first time. In April, she added the phrase unable to follow two-step instructions. I signed the form, acknowledging I had read it. I filed the copy in a green binder on the kitchen counter. That binder is still sitting there.
I flew into Bradley International on a Monday morning in April of 2025. I had 3 days on the calendar. I had cleared the 3 days 6 weeks in advance at my office. I told my manager it was for a family emergency. I told my manager it was the last chance. I brought one carry-on bag. I rented a compact car at the airport. I drove to the house on the tree-lined street. I sat with my father in the sunroom for 40 minutes. He knew who I was for the first 30. I am not going to pretend he knew who I was for the last 10. I asked him one question. I asked him if he remembered his mother's engagement ring.
On the afternoon of the second day of Lily Hargrove's 3-day visit, while Emma was on an overnight shift at Hartford Hospital, Lily pushed her father in a wheelchair out the front door of the house, down the ramp that Emma had paid for, to a rented compact car parked at the curb, and drove him to the office of an estate attorney named Gerald Brenner on Asylum Avenue. Gerald Brenner had been recommended to Lily by a colleague in Boston who had used him for a real estate closing in 2019. He was not the Hargrove family attorney. He had never met Arthur Hargrove. He had no way of knowing that the man in the wheelchair across from his walnut desk had been written into a hospice progress note as severely cognitively impaired 17 days earlier.
Gerald Brenner asked my father 3 questions. He asked him his full name. Arthur Hargrove said Arthur. He asked him the date. My father said Tuesday. The date was a Wednesday. He asked him if he understood he was signing a deed of gift that transferred his mother's sapphire ring to his daughter Lily. My father looked at me. He nodded. Gerald Brenner wrote in the notarial book that the grantor appeared competent and oriented. My father signed the deed with a pen my mother had bought him for his 60th birthday. Gerald Brenner notarized it. I took a photograph of the paper on the way out. That is the photograph my attorney in Boston filed with the probate court.
On the morning of the 3rd day, Lily Hargrove drove to the First Federal Bank on Main Street in West Hartford and presented the notarized deed of gift along with a certified copy of her father's power of attorney, which had been drafted in 2021 when Arthur was still lucid. The bank officer, a polite young man named Devin, walked Lily to the vault. Lily used Arthur's copy of the safe deposit key, the one that had lived in the top drawer of his study since 2023, and opened box 302. She lifted the sapphire ring out of its velvet box. She put it in the pocket of her blazer. She signed the sign out card in her own name. She flew back to Boston at 3:45 that afternoon.
I came off shift at 7 in the morning on that Wednesday. I drove home. I made my father eggs. He did not eat them. He asked me where his sister was. He did not have a sister. I held his hand for 20 minutes and I told him Lily had gone back to Boston and she was on a plane right now and she would call us later. He nodded. He could not find the word for plane. I thought nothing of the ride to Asylum Avenue the day before. Lily had told me she had taken him out for ice cream. I believed her. That sentence is the one I will be angriest at myself about for the rest of my life.
Arthur Hargrove died at 4:11 in the morning. On the 20th day of May, 2025, in a hospital bed set up in the sunroom of the house on the tree-lined street in West Hartford, Connecticut. His daughter Emma was the only person in the room. She held his right hand because his left had been weak since the second surgery. She counted his respirations the way the textbook had taught her. The number fell from 14 to 8 to 3 to 0 over the course of 11 minutes. She pressed her mother's silver cross against her own sternum. She closed her father's eyes with 2 fingers. She called the hospice nurse. She called her sister second. Lily Hargrove did not answer her phone at 4:11 in the morning on the 20th day of May, 2025. The funeral was held on a Saturday afternoon, 3 days after Arthur Hargrove's death, at the small Episcopal church in Farmington, where Emma had once planned to be married. The church had been chosen by Emma because it was the only funeral venue in Hartford County that her father had ever walked into willingly. The minister was the same one who had been scheduled to marry Emma and Tyler Lane 5 years earlier. He had kept the order of service from 1920 for almost 4 decades.
I arrived at the church at 1:15 in a black dress that had been hanging in my closet since the spring of 2020. I had bought it for my mother's memorial. I had never taken the tags off. I sat in the front pew. I did not see Lily walk in. She came through the side door. She sat down at my left because that is where the family sits. I did not look at her hands. I was looking at the casket. The minister began the eulogy at 1:32. At 1:41, I looked down at Lily's left hand and I saw the sapphire on her ring finger, and the rest of the service happened inside a room I was no longer in.
I wore the ring to the funeral because my father had given it to me. I did not hide it. I did not slide it off in the car. I wore it because I was his daughter too, and because the ring was mine, and because I was not going to pretend it was not mine in the same building where we were burying him.
I recognized the setting before I recognized the stone. It is a 6-prong head on a yellow gold band that my grandmother had resized in 1995. I had held it 1,000 times. I had worn it for 7 months in 2020. It was on my sister's finger on a Saturday afternoon in the church where I was supposed to have been married. I did not stand up. I did not make a sound. I folded my hands in my lap and I waited for the minister to finish because my father would have wanted the minister to finish.
The reception was held in the parish hall next to the church. 46 people attended. Emma Hargrove stood in the receiving line for 90 minutes. She shook hands with 2 retired civil engineers, 3 of her mother's former teaching colleagues, 4 of her own colleagues from the medical intensive care unit, and 1 woman she did not recognize who turned out to be a childhood friend of her grandmother. Lily Hargrove stood 6 feet away in a black silk blouse with her left hand resting on a plate of finger sandwiches. The sapphire caught the overhead fluorescent light every time she reached for a cup.
I waited until the last guest had left. I followed my sister out into the parking lot. I asked her, in a voice I did not recognize as my own, where she had gotten the ring. Lily reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and took out a folded sheet of paper. She opened it on the hood of her rental car. She showed me the notarial seal and the date. She said, "Dad gave it to me in April." She said it the way a person reads a line off a cue card. I did not argue. I walked to my own car. I drove away from the church. I drove straight to the one place in Hartford that had known the ring longer than I had.
Emma Hargrove walked into my shop on Pratt Street at 4:20 in the afternoon, on the Saturday of her father's funeral in a black dress that did not belong in my kind of store. I recognized her before she introduced herself. I had resized the ring for her in 2019. I remembered the way she had held it up to the light and said, "This is my grandmother's." I said to her, "Emma, I have been waiting 6 weeks to see you walk through that door." I opened the drawer under the counter. I handed her the envelope. I told her to sit down before she opened it. Inside the envelope were 4 photographs of the sapphire ring taken against a white velvet pad from 4 angles, dated and time-stamped by my shop camera on the 24th of April, 2025. Underneath the photographs was a photocopy of a notarized deed of gift that had been handed to me by Emma's sister Lily when she brought the ring in for a quarter-size reduction. I had refused the resize the first time she came in. I had recognized the ring. I had asked her for provenance. She had left angry. 2 weeks later, she came back with the deed. I did the resize because I am not a lawyer and I am not a judge. But I photocopied the deed and I photographed the ring before I touched a file to it. I have done that every time an heirloom piece has come through my door since my father started training me in 1989.
I read the deed in the jeweler's back room on a walnut table under a brass lamp. I read the date of execution. I read the name of the notary. I read the name of the attorney. I read the line where my father had signed, in a hand I did not recognize as his hand. I knew, before I got to the bottom of the page, what I was going to do. I had read my father's April hospice progress notes. The same morning, I had signed the acknowledgement form. Severe cognitive impairment. Unable to follow 2-step instructions. 17 days before the deed was signed.
Emma Hargrove filed a petition in Hartford County Probate Court on the 29th of May, 2025, 9 days after her father's death and 6 days after the funeral. The petition alleged undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity in the execution of the April 24th deed of gift. Her attorney was a woman named Helen Ogwa, who had represented elder abuse plaintiffs in Connecticut for 22 years. Helen read the hospice progress notes before she read the deed. She told Emma on a Thursday morning in her office on Lewis Street that she had never seen a clearer record of incapacity in her career.
I testified on a Tuesday morning in September. I wore my hospital identification badge under my jacket because it made me feel like I was still a nurse. I read the phrase severe cognitive impairment out loud from a copy of my father's hospice chart. I read the phrase unable to follow 2-step instructions. I read the date, April 7th. The deed was signed on April 24th. I did not cry on the stand. I had been on the stand before, as a nurse, in other cases. I knew how to hold my voice. I held it.
I testified on the Wednesday morning. I brought my father's 1995 ledger and I brought my own shop camera photographs from April 24th. I handed both into evidence. The judge asked me if I could identify the ring. I said I had known that ring longer than I had known my own wife. The judge asked me why I had photographed it. I said because I had been trained by my father to photograph every heirloom piece that crossed my counter under any circumstances that made me uneasy. The judge asked me if Lily Hargrove had made me uneasy. I said yes, sir. The forensic geriatric psychiatrist hired by Emma's attorney was a physician named Dr. Priya Ramanathan of Yale New Haven Hospital. She reviewed 39 pages of hospice progress notes, 18 medication administration records, and 6 weeks of bedside nursing observations. She testified that Arthur Hargrove on April 24th, 2025, was incapable of understanding the legal meaning of the word deed, the legal meaning of the word gift, or the long-term consequence of transferring a piece of property out of his estate. She delivered the testimony in 23 minutes without looking at her notes once. The Hartford County probate judge ruled on the 14th of October, 2025. The deed of gift was set aside in full. The sapphire ring was ordered returned to the estate of Arthur Hargrove and distributed in accordance with the 1995 promise documented in the Roth and Sons ledger. Lily Hargrove's attorney filed an appeal on the 1st of November. The Connecticut Appellate Court denied the appeal on the 30th of January 2026. The ring was handed back across a walnut table in Helen Ogawa's office on the 3rd of February. Emma Hargrove signed the receipt with a pen that had belonged to her mother.
I never married. I never called Tyler. I never will. I wear the ring under my left glove, on a thin silver chain around my neck, against my sternum. On every shift, I work in the medical intensive care unit at Hartford Hospital. I have held the hands of 147 dying people since my father died. I have felt the ring press against my chest every one of those times. I have not decided yet whether I forgive my sister. I have decided I do not need to be the person who decides it. The ring is home. My father is gone. My grandmother made the only promise that mattered. The rest is paperwork.
I am David Roth. I am the third-generation owner of Roth & Sons Jewelers on Pratt Street in Hartford, Connecticut. My grandfather opened this shop in 1952. My father ran it from 1978 to 2008. I have run it since. I have resized 9,000 rings in my life. I have turned away 31. I have been asked a dozen times by a dozen reporters what I learned from the Hargrove case. I will tell you the same thing I told them. A ring does not belong to the finger that wears it. A ring belongs to the promise that was made the day it was chosen. Emma's grandmother chose her in 1995 in a hospital room with a nurse and a discharge form and a pencil. My father wrote it in his ledger the same afternoon. Everything that has happened since has been paperwork trying to outrun a sentence written in blue ballpoint ink. The question I want to leave you with is this one. When a family fights over an object that was promised long before any paper existed, who is the real owner? Is it the person holding the deed? Is it the person holding the chain around their neck on the night shift? Or is it the woman on the 4th floor of Hartford Hospital in 1995 who thought she was giving a gift to a 9-year-old girl and did not imagine that 30 years later she would need witnesses? Next week on After the Will. A pediatrician in Brooklyn opens her mailbox on a Tuesday morning and finds a subpoena from a lawyer she has never heard of. The subpoena names her as a joint owner of an investment account she did not know existed. Her brother has been using her name on the account for 14 years. The account holds $312,000. The account was opened the week their mother was diagnosed with early onset dementia.